This is a Q Media production.
Leading and navigating change across a business can be overwhelming. So many leaders are handed a project by their board or CEO, and suddenly they're expected to create the vision, inspire their team, navigate roadblocks, and make some really hard decisions. It can feel like you're swimming in the ocean at night, not knowing which way to go. So how is a leader supposed to know how to drive change? The challenge is, there's no course or dummy's guide to leading change. Until now. This is your crash course in leading change, and I'm your guide, Lauren Ryder. In this podcast, you'll learn from top C-suite and executive leaders who've driven impactful change across their organizations. No matter what project you're leading, maybe it's a sales transformation or a restructure or a digital transformation, either way, the approach to leading change is the same. It all starts with an inspirational leader, and that's you. Today, we have a special treat for you. While our usual guests are high-flying C-suite executives, today we're taking a unique twist. We're sitting down with someone who's often in the trenches, advising change leaders as they navigate complex change programs together. She's known across the globe as the change superhero, regularly sharing her knowledge and expertise on LinkedIn. Our guest today is none other than the amazing, always sparkling Sharon Connolly. In this episode, we talk about what project failure really means and the key success metrics to keep the sponsor updated with real-time results. Sometimes, a little bit of unicorn dust is all you need. Hi, Sharon. Welcome to the podcast.
To be here, Lauren.
Now, Sharon, you are known as the change superhero, which I think is a bit appropriate, seeing as though change management is often known as the hero swooping in when the project goes a little bit off the rails. So tell me, why do we think so many of these projects are going off the rails?
Well, we have to define going off the rails, because what do we mean by that? Do we mean scope creep? Do we mean that the timelines have slipped? Or do we mean lack of communication and resistance? So I think when we talk about projects going off the rails, we have to first of all clearly define what that means, and then think about who can do the saving, if saving can be done.
I think this will be a fascinating conversation, because I would love to dig deep in what some of these issues are, because I think, coming from a space where we are the change management team and we can actually see things from a little bit of a different perspective, what are the things that we see? Like, what are the actual triggers that we know that we're having some problems with our projects?
Well, the other thing, going back to some of the things that go wrong, it's really important for us to have good metrics to track success. And before we start tracking success, really define what we think success is. Because is it what's in the business case as determined by the sponsor and the organization, or is it what the users think is success? And sometimes that's the problem, that a successful rollout is very different for the people who it's happening to and those who've planned it.
I'd love to dig into the business case, because I don't know how many projects you've jumped into where the business case wasn't finished, or maybe it didn't reflect reality because the scope has changed. What's your view on setting up and keeping a business case up to date?
Well, the first thing there that you missed is actually the absence of a business case a lot of the time. When I do coaching with change managers, I talk to them about, okay, what are you trying to achieve? What are you going to be measured on? How will we know if you're successful? And they come up with some metrics, and I say, what does it say in the business case? And then they'll say, what business case? How can we deliver what we need to and be measured on that if we don't know where we're going? And it's quite often a problem. Now, sometimes if you're like a seed campaign, if you're just testing and learning, maybe, or if it's agile methodology, maybe there are other documents that you've got to go by, but we really need to know, where do we start, what are we trying to achieve, and how will we measure success? And what I would say to change managers that don't have a business case is to create one. Now, if you don't know what goes in a business case, just go online, Google it, and have a look at the outlines. And then in your change plan, just put the bones of a business case and get it signed off by your sponsor so that you know where you're headed.
That's great. I think we find a lot of business leaders actually don't even know where to start. Like, what would be some of the metrics that a business leader would want to look at when it comes to return on investment for a project?
Well, we need to look at benefit realization. So what's being measured? How will we know? What are we trying to achieve? And sometimes the way to start this as a change manager, we look at what's broken, what is not working, why have we got to do this, and this is how we can communicate a compelling why to the end users, the stakeholders, the recipients of the change. But first of all, look at what's broken. Now, things aren't always broken. Sometimes we have to do something because it's a regulatory requirement. And we need to look at, well, what happens if we don't do that? But we need to look at the pain points, first of all, and then we can move on from the pain points. What are we fixing? And then what will be the benefits of us fixing that?
So we've got a business case in place now. Thanks for that. So we've talked about problems with projects. So we kick off our project and it starts working. What are those things that start to crop up that we know we might start be running into trouble?
Governance, too many cooks, spoiling too many, what do they, what are the cooks?
Too many cooks spoil the broth.
The broth, I was going to say broth, is it broth? Too many cooks spoil the broth. So we have to have a clear structure of who is making the decisions in the project and what's the chain of command, who has the ultimate say when there's conflict. We've got scope creep because things change inside or sometimes outside of our control. And of course, we need to adjust the project to cater for these. That's normal, but that's not failure. That's normality. That's real life. So we need to continually adapt. We need to continually measure. We need to continually look at what is going wrong, what are the risks, and what can we do to mitigate things going wrong in the future. And a lot of this is project. It's not change, but here's where we get the shared responsibility. And I think that a lot of change practitioners do need to embrace more of that project methodology to elevate themselves within their projects.
So the things that we kind of see when stakeholders start fighting with each other, or they can't agree, or we find resistance in the project, those are the things that I see, we've got some trouble brewing. How do you actually find that and diagnose it? Because sometimes it's a little bit under the covers.
Yeah, the thing about that is that managing change resistance, stakeholder engagement, that's your job. People talk about that as if it's something unexpected that all of a sudden happened. You need to plan for that. We need to do our stakeholder engagement and listen to people and go, what are the potential problems here? What might go wrong? Why would your team not be able to do this? By asking the right questions at the outset, by using the skills that we have inherently as change managers, we learn, there is a possible pitfall there. What do we do to stop that happening? How can we plan for these things that may go wrong to try to stop them going wrong in the first place? Of course, things will go wrong. COVID or whatever will go wrong. Of course, things will go wrong and we have to react. But if we do our jobs in terms of providing the training, doing the engagement and doing the communication, then we should have less of these things happening.
I think it's time to look at some examples, because I think between you and I, we've seen a few, not sure we want to call them disasters, but some problematic projects that have come our way. And I think it's worthwhile examining them and to kind of understand what the issue was, but then also how to maybe not get there in the first place. So, all right, off you go.
Okay. Well, I think we could talk about loads of these, and we could also frame them as challenges as well. So if we talk about projects that are global, where we have got, I've delivered change to people who don't speak English, working on a laptop up a mountain. Okay, these are challenges that you overcome. Let's talk about things that you can't fix. Let's talk about battles that you need to tap out and go, I'm done here, because nothing I do is going to make any difference. So challenges, change managers love challenges, and we can overcome them. What can't you overcome? If your organization is not ready for change. Now, we know that we've got change maturity in organizations from level 1, where there's no change management, where any communication is done by the project, or maybe there isn't even any type of PMO set up. The communication is done by the EA or Chinese whispers. Now, when everybody starts somewhere, when we've got a low level of change maturity, as a change manager, one of the things that I love to do is to leave the organization more mature than when I started. But if they're open to it, if they do not want change management and they hire you as a change manager, you're just my favorite. People love this term. They love it when I say you feel like a fish swimming in custard, because that's what it feels like. There's nothing that you can do to progress if the organization isn't ready to let their employees have the psychological safety of airing their views and sharing their concerns. If an organization puts out a survey and is not willing to publish the results of that survey, how can you foster a collaborative communication within that organization? So I think one thing that is not worth fighting is if they bring you on board as a change manager, but they don't really want change management.
You know, it's so funny. I had an experience. It was, funnily enough, it was the only change engagement that I actually left from, because that was exactly what happened. And it wasn't so much they weren't ready for it. They really didn't understand it. They really didn't. They were told that they had to get a change manager in, yet the CIO had no idea what the value would be. The project managers had no idea how to leverage our skills. And so, yeah, it was a real problem, and we had to go because there was no value being provided. And it did. It felt exactly like fish swimming in custard.
Yeah, and the particular project that I'm thinking about, right at the beginning. Now, here's a red flag, and I don't know if you, or I'm sure some of the other listeners will have had this. Oh, thanks so much for coming to this interview. Do you know you're the fourth change manager that we've had? The other three were useless. We couldn't work with them. And it actually turns out, and this has happened a couple of times, that they weren't useless. They just were fish swimming in custard, and there was no fit, and they couldn't do it anymore. So knowing that the previous change managers hadn't performed as expected, one of the first things that I do is I go, okay, let's get you all in a room and let me tell you what change management is. Let me tell you what I do as a change manager, how I operate, because we're all different. Some are more strategic, some are more training, some are more comms. We're all treading our own path in change management. So I wanted to start off saying, this is what I'm going to do. This is how I will work with you. And they're sitting there going, oh, this is amazing. We're going to learn so much. We're not ready for any of it, but...
You know, I think that's really poignant because we've had a project recently where the project manager said, look, I've worked with this change manager before. I'd really like to get them back on the project. And I said, sure, great, I'll do an interview. And unfortunately, this person didn't actually have the skill set. And I think that that's what a lot of change leaders and business managers miss, is that change managers actually do have a bunch of different skill sets. And it can be quite rare to find people who actually have all of the ones that you might need for a program. And so I think it's really important. So when you do interview change managers, that you actually know what you need from them and actually be really specific, because they'll tell you what they can and can't do and what they've done before. One thing that we've done in the past as well is actually have a senior person who's more part-time but can actually mentor and coach a change manager who might not have all the skills. And I think it's worth a business investing in that model.
Definitely. And the new terminology for that is a fractional resource. And I think that we're going to see a lot more of that as we go forward. So somebody who's more experienced like yourself or myself can mentor and elevate the change maturity inside the organization from within.
Leading transformational change can be challenging without a community of like-minded professionals where you can learn and practice the real skills of transformation. I am excited to share that Jez Tile has just launched an incredible online global community of transformation professionals. And let me tell you, it is a game changer. It's called People of Transformation, and it's a deep dive beyond the theories, beyond the frameworks, and straight into actionable excellence. It will allow you to shift from problem seeking to opportunity creation and eventually future shaping. So if you're ready to lead the charge, head to peopleoftransformation.com and use the code LEADINGCHANGE at checkout for your special offer. Founding member spots are limited, so don't miss out on this incredible opportunity. So if we're talking to change managers, what advice are we going to give them if they feel that it's just not working?
Do you mean if the wheels are coming off the project, or you mean if there's a bad fit for the organization?
Well, I think it could be a bit of both because I think sometimes you misdiagnose what the actual issue is. So how do you actually find out whether it's a project problem or it's a me problem?
If it's a project problem, there's two things that I look at. First of all, I go back to the business case and make sure that it's still valid and are we on track? Are we delivering and measuring the right things? And as a change manager as well, we're often good facilitators and we can get the entire project in a room and we can have a look at where are we now? Are we all on the same page? Are we going in the right direction? So we refer back to the business case. The other thing we have to, as well as having that strategic skill set and applying some of our project methodology, we also need to really think about the real reason that we're there is for the customer journey. And then I put myself in the shoes of the recipients of the change and really think about how does this feel? How does this look for them? And really concentrate on the customer journey. So I've got two hats. I've got, first of all, am I delivering what I'm paid to deliver and I'm measured on? But also, am I doing what is really my skill set, which is taking the recipients of the change on the journey with empathy? So those are the two things that I would do if the project is off track. If you're not the right fit for the organisation, it comes down to who is batting for you. So have you got a sponsor in your corner? And we spoke earlier about governance. And if the governance is a mess, if you've got no proper structured steerco, or you've got more than one product owner or more than one sponsor and there's fighting there, and nobody's batting for you in your corner, then it's going to be really difficult. Unless you're senior, unless you're very senior and you're on the steerco yourself, and then you're fighting your own battles. But a lot of the time, we rely on somebody to vouch for us and somebody to champion change within the project.
Brings up a really interesting point around governance and where change management should fit in that governance structure, because too often I find change management just kind of sits as a little, box off the side and they're going to do some training in comms. Whereas the successful programs we've been on, project management and program management sit in the same box right there next to the sponsor because they have the same impact across the program. So how have you seen it work or not work?
I've seen probably the same as you. I've seen so many variations of this. And it depends on the size of the project. And it really depends on the players in that project as well, because you might have program manager, project manager, change manager, and the project and the change manager are equal. You might have one person doing those, or as you said, you quite often still have the change manager working under the project manager. Look, sometimes if you are in a great team, there's so many blurred edges of the boundaries, and it doesn't matter. Sometimes if you are supposed to be level pegging with the project manager, that can be a fight as well. So I can't say that there's a brilliant way for it to work. It really depends on the team dynamics. You just need to be heard. You just need to have an opportunity to put your case and be heard and be valued. I think it comes down to no matter what the hierarchy is, it's being valued. So if we talk about an organisation such as Westpac or CBA, most change managers are not going to get airtime in the steerco. They're not. But you need to have somebody who values your opinion, values your insights, and takes that and fights that in the steerco for you, so that you even though you're not there, it might just be your slides or your communications or your concerns or your risks being raised, but somebody is putting that case forward for you. And you could be in a steerco yourself and nobody's listening to you. So
That's right. You mentioned something a few minutes ago. It was about a skill that change managers should have. And I actually believe everyone should have this skill. And you mentioned facilitation.
Okay.
And it is a skill that over the years I have loved to perfect and to work on. And I've seen some incredible facilitators and I've copied their style.
Yeah.
And honestly, now it's my most favorite bit of engaging with clients. But I feel like there's a lot of people, change managers coming up the rank and business leaders who haven't really had an opportunity to facilitate sessions because it's such an important skill. How do you recommend people getting those skills?
Well, I think first of all, we need to make sure that the listeners know the big difference between facilitation and training and presenting. So there is a massive difference between, I don't think everybody needs to be able to facilitate, because I think that's very special. If you do that well and you love that, you have to really listen. You have to be quick at listening. And it's questions like, that's so interesting, tell me more. And I don't think everybody has to have that skill. Everybody does need to be confident to give a basic presentation. Even training, does everybody need to be able to train? Not necessarily. They need to be able to present. Facilitation, I think, is very important to a change manager because it's an extension of our listening. It is tell me more. And I always said, as a trainer and facilitator, one of the things that I've got is really big ears. I mean, they're not actually really big, but you have to listen to what's not being said. People are, I don't like this change. Actually, you're not really complaining about the change. You're complaining about other things. And this is just you venting. And one of the things that a facilitator will do is listen and go, tell me more about that. And then ask the right questions to figure out what's going on. But also, a great facilitator will be really aware that there is neurodiversity in their audience, and they'll make sure that everybody's being heard, and they'll ask questions to tease out some of the gems that might be in people, that some of the gems that might be in their audience that they just need to get out. That's a real skill. I think it's to do with listening, but also to do with empathy and interest as well. That a change manager is really interested in, or they should be really interested in, what it is they're delivering.
I want to change tack here because this morning I was looked at LinkedIn and somebody had posted that McKinsey stat that has been making the rounds for I don't know how many years, the 70% of projects fail. We hear this all the time. And this particular post found 3 other studies that actually supported that 70%. And I look at that number and I think, if 70% of projects actually failed, why would any business ever invest in a project full stop? What is your take on this?
So I think if you dug into the studies, I did read an article that somebody who did a really big deep dive on this, and there's no evidence for most of those studies. There really isn't. I think the original study was by IBM in the 1970s. And the first thing with all of these studies and all of our change models, all models, they've been around for so long and we are so different. They're interesting, but are they relevant? And I think we also have to come back to something that we spoke about a little bit right at the beginning. What is failure? Is over budget failure? Is scope creep failure? Is not realizing 10 benefits, only 8? Is that failure? Are we in an agile project and we actually decided to go down a different route? What is failure? And probably about 3 years ago, the first time that I'd seen this 70%, I thought, no way, I've worked on loads of projects. None of them have failed. And I put something out on LinkedIn and I said, I think I just put a poll out saying, whose project failed? And people were saying, no. There were 1 or 2, but it was like 1 or 2%. If 400 people had responded, maybe 2 had said we decided to can the project because. But the project didn't fail. It was outside influences. And maybe it was halted or maybe it was paused. But very few projects actually fail.
So that's really interesting. I have been on one failed project.
Okay.
And we actually weren't even on it from the beginning. It was failing, and we happened to be on another project in the same organization, and the CFO said, hey, we're putting in this ERP. Can you come and just have a look at it? And we had a look, and I thought, time to get some change in here. We brought all the stakeholders
Yeah.
in a room, figured out what they needed because they were actually nearly done with the build at this stage. As it turned out, none of the requirements from the users had been brought into play at the beginning. They had just actually outsourced it to a vendor to do the whole thing, and suddenly we were in testing. And it got to the point where it was actually too hard to backtrack, and they actually ended up pulling the pin. I'm sure they'll upgrade at some stage, but when we left the organization, it was still on pause. It was a really interesting case study because I think, if I look at the root cause of that one, it was simply lack of stakeholder engagement up front. Do you see a lot of that?
Well, that's interesting because I think that, again, lots of change managers could talk about things where something like that has happened. But is that a project failure? The project wasn't set up correctly. There was no due diligence at the beginning. There was no the things that you need to do at the beginning that the project manager needs to do at the beginning hadn't been done. So I wouldn't necessarily call that a failure because it wasn't set up correctly. So I think this again goes back to let's define what failure is.
So we've talked about failure, but how do we actually reframe that conversation and actually talk about success? And are there certain metrics that we should be looking at?
Loads of metrics, loads and loads of metrics. But I think that it's very important to have metrics that are meaningful. And what I mean by that is that a lot of the time, change managers will send out a survey at the end of the project, or they'll do a pulse check halfway through, and they'll ask things like, on a scale of 1 to 5, how happy are you with our communications? And what happens here, there's a few issues that I've got with this. Most people are going to answer a 3 to 4. Okay, so you're going to end up with quite a large percentage of people answering 3 and 4, and then you'll maybe get one disgruntled person that hates it to skew that. So first of all, when we do a survey, unless we have over 100 participants, then there's really no value in any of the numbers. Ideally, 500 participants. But the main thing, even if you just ask 5 people, so what? Your communication was okay. What? Do you want a round of applause? Great. We need to ask something that's meaningful and really meaningful for our sponsors. For example, if the sponsor sees that 60% of people rated the change communication above average, so what? Round of applause for the person who wrote the email. What the stakeholder needs to see is that 80% of people feel more productive and less frustrated on the new system. That is something that they can go, great, we made the right decision, as opposed to, great, Sharon, you wrote a nice email. So it's really important that we ask questions and that we survey and we pulse check in something that reflects the success of the business case, or that is very meaningful, or the other thing that actually means that we take an action. I'll give you an example of that. So a project that I did, we created this brilliant training, this amazing SharePoint. Nobody went there. Nobody watched our training. And the stats were alarming. I could go into the steerco and I could say, nobody's watching our training and nobody's visiting our SharePoint. Now, I then needed something else to get action. And the action was, because they're not watching our training, because they're not reading our quick reference guides, I have some stats that show that we've got an increase in calls to the help desk. So here is something concrete. And then I could go into that steerco and I could say, we have the resources, we've piloted them, we know that they work, but we know that people are not utilizing them. So, sponsor, I need you to get the leaders to deliver this training in their town halls, in their weekly meetings. So I used stats to drive action we've got this, people aren't consuming this information. The results of this are we've got an increase in calls to the help desk. That's longer wait times. If you can back anything up with a time or dollar metrics, longer wait times mean that we're losing X amount of dollars every day. Can we please put pressure on the leaders to do something? So do you see where I'm driving action, not just good email, Sharon?
As businesses grow, enterprise change teams are expected to deliver more. But it can be challenging to keep all your company's change planning aligned. Documents get lost or out of date, and executives can't get a clear report on your enterprise change activities. Until now. Change Plan is the incredible connected platform that gives you a powerful, easy-to-use workspace. You'll get all your reporting at a click, an automated front door process, an org chart synced in with your HR system, and the best part, there's portfolio dashboards for leaders. It is the most comprehensive and user-friendly change tool I have seen on the market, and the results speak for themselves. Teams who use Change Plan experience a 30% bump in productivity and up to 50% reduction in change saturation. If you want to see Change Plan in action, head over to changeplan.co/leadingchange to set up an obligation-free demo for your team. We're looking at when to send pulse checks. I think sometimes people go, oh God, I don't want to overdo it. I don't want to underdo it. I think sometimes at certain milestones to check that something happened, or as you say, that we're getting the outcomes. One time we sent a pulse check when there actually was no noise. It was a really interesting case study because the whole team had been involved for the entire project. Every Teams meeting, they were like heart emojis and claps, and everybody was so amazed. And suddenly there was this eerie silence.
Okay.
And I said right then, okay, we hung up from that call. I said, pulse check. And what we did, we figured out that we'd actually given them too much too quickly. And they gave us that feedback, and we were able to take that stat and go, okay, let's turn this around. Let's replan so that it's actually accessible. Because, once you give people too much, what they call it saturation, they're not going to learn anymore, and they're not going to take on the change.
My question for you around that, given that these people are overloaded, how did you find out that it was too much? What did you use?
So the pulse check that we sent was a really simple survey. There was two main questions that we asked. So first of all is there too much information, right? Have we overloaded you? But the second one, is it going too fast?
Okay.
And the reason we asked that, we were actually running a really accelerated program where we were delivering content every single week. And I said to the stakeholders every week in the team meeting, are they okay? Is it too much? Do we need to pull back? And they've gone, no, we need our ROI. We've got to keep going. And so I knew that the two metrics were going to be too much information and too fast. And those were the two really key points. And the numbers came back really high. What was interesting is some people said, no problem, I've got this.
Yeah.
But, if we actually kind of look at who they probably were, they would have been the overachievers in the organization, the ones who were really keen to get this anyway. But we can't actually work at their pace. We have to work at the pace of sort of the slower people just to make sure that everybody comes along on the journey.
One thing that I would really like to add to that and urge change managers to do more is find ways of sort of doing stealth surveys. I'm sure that they do it in lots of places, but Singapore springs to mind. Okay, when you're in the airport and you go to the loo, on the way out, there's a little screen and you just tap, right? How was your experience in here? And it's so easy to do, to just hit that smiley face and instantly give feedback. And we need to, as change professionals, look at ways to get feedback instantly. So whether it is a button, whether it's a light, I don't know what it is. We need to find ways that we can get feedback without somebody opening a survey and filling in a question. Quite often a QR code. Can we put a QR code that somebody scans and then they just press one button? Because every time I have an interaction with anybody about anything, 2 minutes later, I get a survey, in my inbox. I already have enough emails. No, I'm not going to rate how you were on this call, unless you're going to give me a free voucher or something like that. But we need to be aware that continually asking people how they are is actually an intrusion in their inbox. Find ways of doing these pulse check surveys in one click or one touch.
I love how we're talking about different ways to engage with people. And I say engage purposefully because communicating with people often does look like an email or a presentation on a Teams call. But really, it is about engagement because it has to be two-way.
Yeah.
And, we've talked about QR codes and just different ways to kind of, get the brain going in a sort of more creative way. What are some really cool ways that you found recently to engage people?
I did a LinkedIn post just last week. You commented on it that there is a QR code inside Microsoft Forms that you can put on one slide in PowerPoint. So you are presenting to an audience of 100 people and you want to know what they think about your change. Okay, they all get their phones out, they scan the QR code and they press one option and it immediately comes up on the screen. Now, many of us or some of us have been using things like Slider or Mentimeter, and we have to pay for these, or we have a sort of a cut down version. And a lot of people don't realize that it's actually in Microsoft Office, which means it's in PowerPoint as well. So this is not obtrusive. This is just in time, right away. I'm listening to you, get my phone out, scan this QR code, done now. So it's instant feedback, and we need to look at ways that we can do this more. Another thing that I think about that I'd love to set up, it all sounds a bit complicated. There was a time in Woolworths when you went shopping and you got these little, depending on how much you spent, you got these little green, little green chips. And then there were 3 tubes. And as you came out, you put the chips in the charity that you wanted your money donated to. And I thought I'd love to have those just as people walk in to say, communication faster, communication slower, emails need to drop it in the little tube. And my brain's going, how do I create a long perspex tube? How do I do this? I worked with somebody at AMP who was brilliant. If I'd have told her that the next day, I'd have come in and there would have been these tubes. Everybody who worked with me at AMP is going, oh, I know exactly who that is. But we need to find ways where it's just easy for people, like hitting that smiley face as you come out of the loos. How can we do that to continually pulse check what's going on?
Absolutely. I actually looked in Zoom yesterday. I was looking at all the really cool features, and I haven't tried it, but it looked like it said there is an exit survey functionality sitting in there. So if it's in Zoom now, it might be in Teams, or it might be coming in Teams, because I know they're in competition there.
And it is very important, and you know that this is my thing, this is what Change Superhero is all about, is us all using the technology that we have. So whether you're using Zoom or Teams or WebEx, most of us only scrape the surface of the functionality of the products that we use. And one of the things, I send out a tip to my audience every 4 days, and I sit there going, ooh, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? And sometimes how I found the Forms one there, I go through the menus and I'm thinking, what don't they know? And then, whoa, when did they put that in? Cool. Oh, that's cool. And just by sitting going through the menus, I find stuff that just snuck in without me looking. And we should all do that. Just sit and go through the menus, look at what else is on the buttons, look at what else is on the toolbar, and go, what don't I know? What don't I know? Or share a tip with somebody in your team. We all need to dig deeper and use the stuff that we already have.
And, I think that's really interesting because it's not even just for change tools, for organizational-wide tools. I mean, people use CRMs all the time and probably use, a small percentage of the functionality. Yeah. Organizations, you're already paying for it. Like the number of organizations who said, we need to buy another tool and another tool. I said, have you actually looked at the ones you already own?
We've come round full circle here because that is, to me, is a project failure on change management, because there'll be change managers listening now going, she's talking about lift and shift. And this is what happens. We implement a CRM or an ERP, and there is no budget and there is no time to train the users. We just cram the new platform in. We go, let's just do what we did before on here. We're done. There'll be an additional project to upskill that never happens. And this is then perpetual, because then the new version, which costs millions of dollars, comes in and people go, well, why do we need a new version? Because the old version isn't supported and there's lots of new features in the new version. We don't use the features in the old version. So this, to me, this is probably not measured in that mythical 70%, but this is a real tragedy that there's no time to teach people to use the things that they have to make their lives better. That is a failure.
It is. I mean, and so many projects have that change management piece squished at the end. Yeah. I can't tell you how many projects we sat on and gone, okay, we're ready for go live. Change managers are sitting there excited. Yeah. And then it pushes and it pushes and it pushes it. But everything, go live stays, but then all the training and it squeezes. So I'd like to wrap up with you. But what I'd like to do is ask you a question about our change leaders who are listening. And during this podcast, we have heard a lot about how we should be engaging with our change managers, because I think a lot of business leaders don't necessarily know what they're meant to do with a change manager. So I think we've really got a lot of insight into what we should be doing and how we should be engaging. You've worked with a lot of business leaders, sponsors, business owners. What are the top skills that you believe they should have in order to lead a change?
That's a really good question. And I think the first one is trust. They need to trust that the change manager really knows what they're doing. Now, this is tricky because how do they know that the change manager really knows what they're doing? Perhaps they don't. Many of our skills, we spoke about the skills that the change manager may have as a brilliant facilitator. How do you measure that? So they need to trust that the change manager will come in and sprinkle the unicorn dust and take everybody on the journey. But I think that change managers themselves need to now take responsibility to become more strategic, to have the metrics to back up the unicorn dust that they sprinkle, because they need to be able to say, this project was successful and I was able to increase productivity and reduce frustration, and here are the numbers that prove it. We saved time, here are the numbers. We saved dollar values, here are the numbers. So we actually have to have the numbers. But this just helps the leader trust that we do what we do best, which is really handhold everybody who's on the journey. And the other thing that the really great change manager does, change leader, change analyst, change champion, is to champion the little guy, to listen for the little voices, to listen for the quiet voices and amplify those and make sure that everybody is heard. So the main thing that we do is we handhold everybody and we make sure that everybody is on the journey with us. That's our real skill, and we do that through empathy and through listening. But to enable that, to make sure that that is valued, we've also got to elevate our skills as project professionals, making sure that we really are aware of what's in the business case, that we really understand what benefit realization is being measured, the metrics that we have to produce to support that, and how to beautifully present that to our audience so that they understand it, and then trust us to do our jobs.
I think that encapsulates it perfectly. Sharon, this has been a great, insightful conversation. I've loved it. Now, how can our audience get a little bit of that unicorn dust and contact you?
I'm really active on LinkedIn. I engage in lots of conversations and I post lots of content. So I'd love people to follow or connect to me on there. And they can also visit my website, which is changesuperhero.com.au.
Wonderful. Thanks so much for being here,
Lauren.
Sharon.